Leading Britain's conversation, this is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 6 o'clock, it's understood the son of a Hamas leader, Khalil al-Hayya, has been killed in an Israeli strike in Doha. Al-Hayya is seen as the group's most influential figure abroad and top negotiator. Israel claims the US were forewarned and approved the attack. Former strategist in the UK Cabinet Office, Dr. Lynette Nussbacher, has told LBC Hamas is extremely resilient.
Their organizational structure always bounces back when their senior leaders get killed. And what the Israelis are doing here is not so much causing living Hamas leadership to become dead Hamas leadership. What they're doing is forcing Hamas to keep their heads down, not coordinate, and clearly not turn up to negotiate ceasefires.
In the last few minutes, the Prime Minister says he condemns the attack by Israel. A woman has died while trying to cross the English Channel in a small boat. Kent police were called by the Coast Guard to the port of Dover earlier. A 57-year-old man has been arrested after Heathrow's Terminal 4 had to be evacuated. 20 people were checked over following reports of hazardous materials yesterday. And Nationwide says it's working to fix a problem that's seen its mobile banking app go down. Bosses tell us card payments, cash withdrawals and direct debits are all working OK. In the city, the FTSE 100 has closed up 21 points at 92.42. The pound buys $1.35 and €1.15. LBC weather, heavy rain for the southwest and the far south tonight. Patchier in Northern Ireland and the far west of Scotland, but dry elsewhere. Lows of 7 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Amelia Cox.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. It's 6 p.m. Now, Tonight with Andrew Marr.
Good evening. Game on. The battle for the deputy leadership of the Labour Party will pitch a loyal cabinet minister, the Education Secretary Bridget Phillipson, against whichever critic of the Prime Minister from the left can gain enough support from MPs. Perhaps Lucy Powell, sacked recently as Leader of the Commons. Perhaps someone else. This is going to become a frank critique of the Starmer government and its direction and the reshuffle, all done from inside the Labour Party, but in the full glare of publicity, which is potentially very dangerous for the Prime Minister, though that depends on how people conduct themselves. So far, the contest is a women's-only space. The former Shadow Foreign Secretary Emily Thornberry wants to run. So does Alison McGovern, the local government minister, on the right of the party. So does Bel Ribeiro Addy on the left. To become a formal candidate, each of them needs 80 MPs to back them, so they may well not all make it. I say a woman's space this, but it's not exactly a safe space. Take the likely frontrunner Bridget Phillipson. Only a few weeks ago, she was still being heavily briefed against as a likely sacking in the reshuffle. Now, she's in effect Keir Starmer's chosen champion, and if she wins, a likely candidate as Prime Minister one day. But if she loses, that would be a big and diminishing blow. With reform roaring ahead, this is an incredibly dangerous moment for Labour, and there is plotting and there is nervousness on every side. After the election, I thought we wouldn't go back again to the kind of Westminster paroxysms of hysteria that lasted from Brexit until Rishi Sunak, via Liz Truss and Boris Johnson. It was great fun to bring these stories to LBC audiences, but it was also undeniably very bad for the country. And I fear very much we're heading back straight towards more of the same. Someone else who thinks the government has real issues to address is the former Transport Secretary Louise Haigh. There were calls for her to run for Deputy Leader, but she's ruled herself out, and she came into the studio to tell me why and how this leadership race could address the problems the Starmer government's facing.
I think any internal Labour Party contest allows that to happen, and we run the risk of it then becoming very navel-gazing. But the article that I wrote yesterday for the New Statesman set out where I think we need to go ahead, and that involves an economic reset. And I think a lot of Labour members will be exercised by this and the need to reform our economic policy, we have allowed ourselves to be in a situation where we are entrenching really short-termist decisions. The OBR and the policies adopted by the Bank of England are entrenching the kind of austerity approach that George Osborne set up. And of course, he designed this institutional fiscal framework, but we are actually venerating that even further than he did.
So to be clear, what you would like to see are tax rises that allow the pressure on welfare and the pressure on other public spending to end?
Well, there's two things. I want to see wealth and unearned income taxed higher in this country in order to relieve the burden on working people. But I don't think there's any point in doing that unless we reform the fiscal framework that we're currently operating in. So the OBR makes these 5-year forecasts that even the Bank of England governor has said are highly dubious, highly prone to change. The Chancellor is forced to make decisions on cuts to public services and cuts to welfare that are dependent on this 5-year forecast that is very dubious. A small group
of people meeting in a single room and making a guess.
Completely unaccountable, unelected, and restricting elected politicians' ability to make democratic change. So I think there are very sensible reforms that we could make to the OBR that would then allow the Chancellor more flexibility and would mean that tax rises could then be spent on public services and investing in the future of this country rather than merely satisfying the OBR's predictions.
So if I was Rachel Reeves and I said to you, OK, Louise, just explain to me what you think I should do now, what would you say?
Well, there's a few things. One, I think we need to move from 2 forecasts a year for the OBR to 1 so that it gives the Chancellor more breathing room to make decisions. We shouldn't be conducting policy on a 6-monthly basis, which the current model basically enforces. And we should be asking the OBR to model productivity and savings on a much longer forecast. They have a very arbitrary, rigid 5-year forecast that, as I say, really entrenches that short-termist thinking.
And you don't think that that would spook the markets further? Because obviously we're quite close to the edge.
The average maturity of a UK gilt in this country is 14 years. So markets already take a much longer-term view, and governments should take that longer-term view as well. Everybody knows that if you invest now, for example, in early years, for example, in tackling childhood poverty, then that is going to reap savings way into the distance, 10, 20, 30 years in advance. It's very difficult for democratic governments to make those decisions, but we're making it even harder by this fiscal architecture that we have around us.
This sounds fascinating and coherent. Why are you not running yourself?
Well, the deputy leadership contest is obviously an internal position, and I want to be able to make the case for these kind of reforms and make the case for long-term economic reform. And I believe staying on the back benches.
Couldn't you make that case as deputy leader? Lots of people I talk to say that if you ran, you'd win.
Well, as I say, I think the deputy leader, is a role that is relatively internal facing, and I worry that my voice would be hampered in the race. So I'm staying on the backbenches to keep making the case.
So who are you supporting?
I'll be nominating Lucy Powell today. I sat round the cabinet table with Lucy, obviously for a number of years, both in cabinet and shadow cabinet, and I know she's a brave, principled person who is not afraid to speak her mind, and I think that's what the position demands.
It's not a very deep secret that Andy Burnham would like to come back to the Commons and possibly have a tilt for the top job himself. He mentioned you and he mentioned Lucy as people he would like to see getting the job. How would you regard his return to British politics?
Well, Andy's already obviously a huge player in British politics.
I'm in
very
London,
successful
Sorry, Andy.
Greater Manchester mayor. Look, we want this government to succeed. I think with the kind of reforms that I'm proposing, then it would give the government much more breathing room and able to deliver on the enormous mandate for change that we were elected on. I think that is absolutely possible with the current leadership and the cabinet. But they need to face the realities of the constraints that we have placed around ourselves.
If there is no change in direction, if there's no change, do you think Keir Starmer will be leader at the time of the next election?
I think the absolute risk of a failure to deliver that change and a failure to meet the challenges that we are facing as a country and as an economy means that populists will fill the vacuum, and the very real risk then is a Nigel Farage Prime Minister.
I was really asking you whether you thought he would stay as the Labour Prime Minister up to the next election all the way through.
Well, I think Keir Starmer will command the support of the Parliamentary Labour Party and the Labour Party more widely, whilst ever he is delivering on the mandate on which he was elected, which is for change.
While he was delivering the mandate, I'm sorry, I'm pressing you a little bit, but If he doesn't make the kind of changes that you are suggesting, do you think he will survive as Prime Minister?
Look, I think I'm not going to sort of engage with hypotheticals like that. He was elected with a landslide majority just last year. I think he has the ability, he has the capability, and he has the opportunity to deliver on that mandate for change. But they need to address these fundamentals of the economy and of the fiscal framework that they've put around themselves at the budget this year.
It's obvious that Bridget Phillipson is running with, as it were, the approval of the Cabinet and the Prime Minister. Do you think that there is now a chance, because she's working very hard, she's very popular in the party, that there might be no contest at all? In other words, that nobody else can get the 80 votes to take her on? Well,
I hope there will be a contest. It's the right thing to do, to present that to Labour Party members. And that's one of the many reasons why I'm happy to be nominating Lucy. There's some brilliant candidates, and I'm really pleased to see they're all female as well in the contest to replace the almost irreplaceable Angela Rayner. But so I hope after Thursday there will be a proper contest for the members. The reshuffle has been widely described as a tilt to the right. Do you agree? I don't necessarily agree with that. I think it's more. I actually don't think there is a particular factional overlay of the reshuffle. I can't explain why certain figures like Lucy and Ian were removed from the cabinet, because I don't think it was justified. But as I say, and as I'm going to keep repeating, I don't think moving people around the cabinet table is going to make any difference to our ability to meet the change that is needed in this country without changing our economic policy. Well, let me ask about one other huge economic and indeed political part of the agenda, which is net zero and climate change, because there was an attempt to remove Ed Miliband from that portfolio. What is your view about the importance of the climate change part of the manifesto? Well, I mean, it is absolutely central, and it was in that manifesto loud and clear, the basis of one of the bases on which we were elected. So it's absolutely right. Ed regards his position as a leader on net zero issues and green issues incredibly seriously, and I'm delighted that he's remained in that post. What's your view of the Renters Reform Bill? Because there are some suggestions that that is going to be pulled or watered down. Well, on all of Angela's legacy, which includes renters reform and workers' rights, as well as the wider planning and house building agenda, that absolutely needs to be preserved and protected. Obviously, there's going to be huge question marks over implementation on all those areas of legislation, and we absolutely need to commit to those manifesto commitments. Renters reform is going to make a serious impact on many, many people's lives who live in insecure circumstances at the whim of their landlords in damp, unfit homes. This is the kind of change that people voted for. Absolutely, we need to deliver on that. And since you're here, two stories of the day. First of all, we've seen this extraordinary news of Israel attacking Doha. Given that, and given the mood in the party, what do you think needs to happen in terms of the government's response to it? What would you like to see the government now saying about the whole Palestinian and Gaza issue that it hasn't been saying so far? Well, firstly, it's extraordinarily welcome that we're set to recognise Palestine. I think their statehood is obviously an inalienable right, and it's absolutely right that we are doing so. The sanctions that we've imposed so far on the Israeli government haven't worked. I think we need to go beyond that and sanction Netanyahu and the rest of the government that are clearly committing war crimes on a daily basis. Louise Haigh, thank you very much indeed for coming in. Thank you. Right, let's get some reaction to that with our political correspondent, Aggie Chambray. Aggie, first of all, 3 times I asked very politely whether she thought Keir Starmer would be Prime Minister at the time of the next election. An answer we did not get.
Indeed, Andrew, that felt like quite a moment, didn't it? Louise Haigh, former cabinet minister and kind of very well respected in the party, unable to say Keir Starmer will still be Labour leader at the next general election. I think that's quite a moment too, because it's what a lot of people are saying behind the scenes. And all she could really say was he will continue to command the support while he is delivering the mandate. Oof. Whilst he is delivering. Now, the other point that came out of that, I thought, was that Bridget Phillipson is doing so well tonight that there might not be a contest at all. In other words, it might be that nobody else can get 80 supporters. What are you picking up? Well, I've just been sitting in the House of Commons, and I think that is what a lot of people think. From what I understand, Lucy Powell who will, I think, be the next best, get the next most. She, I understand, has kind of dozens of supporters, but they're not confident they're going to get over that 80 80 MP mark.
I mean, dozens could mean 24, couldn't it? All right.
Right.
Aggie, thank you very, very much indeed for that. Now, Louise Haigh and I spoke a little bit there about the accusations that the post-Rayner reshuffle had been used to move this government further to the right. Well, one prominent backbencher who's come forward to say the new deputy leader has to be from the left for the good of the Labour Party is Dawn Butler, the MP for Brent East. Dawn's also said she wants to run to be London Mayor if Sadiq Khan were to step down. And she's with me now. I say with me, Dawn, but we're speaking down the line because you couldn't get here because of the tube strikes. So first question, if you were London Mayor, what would you be doing to resolve them?
That's a funny first question, Andrew. Well, obviously, negotiations, I think when Sadiq came in, he actually prevented a lot of the strikes that were planned. And so it is about dialogue and discussion with the trade unions. And as you know, I'm a trade unionist. So if I ever get that privilege to be Mayor of London, then I'm sure that we would have open and transparent dialogue.
Dawn, we've been talking about the likelihood of a deputy leadership election. We don't know whether there will be one yet. What would you like this election contest to do in terms of changing or reshaping the direction of the government?
I really think, even though it's a really short period of time, I feel that it's important that we do have a debate. There has been a lot of turmoil, a lot of change over the last 14 months. You know, Labour government came in on the back of 14 years of Tory austerity. They came in, there was a lot that they needed to do. I feel that now we've entered, as the Prime Minister said, phase two. That phase two must include the diversity of thoughts and opinions within the party. We are a broad church, and I think we would do well to remember that.
And of all those colleagues who have said they would like to run, who would you back?
Well, as I say, I'd like to back candidates to make sure that we have a diverse discussion. So I think there's some interesting candidates in the mix. We have some great parliamentarians, so we're not short of talent in the party. So I think it's great. I heard Louise say that she was supporting Lucy Powell. I think Belle's written an excellent article today which outlines why she's standing to be deputy leader. I think you've got Emily Thornberry, who's got her ideas on why she should be deputy leader. I think let's hear those ideas. We should not.
So you're listening. You haven't made up your mind. You're waiting to see what they say.
Yeah, I am very much open-minded, and I'm listening to what people want, not just what the MPs want. Obviously, this is the first hurdle that MPs have to clear. But after that, we've also got to go to the membership, and we also have to consider the general public. So they need to look at us and say, right, this is not just a Labour government, but a Labour Party who knows where they're going.
Final last question, briefly, if you don't mind, Dawn. John McDonnell said that this reshuffle pushes the Labour government to the right. Do you agree, and would you be worried about that?
I would be worried if we were trying to out-reform reform. That is an impossible task. And also, it sits so discomfortably with me that it's just something we should not pursue. So we have to resort back to Labour's values. We have to talk about humanity. We have to talk about care. We have to talk about the safety net. We have to not be shy about London and how, London is the economic driver of the country, and also talk about outside of London and the rest of the country and how we all contribute to make our country as great as it is. And that's important.
Sure is. Dawn Butler for now. Thank you very much indeed. Now, up next, we're going to be talking about the extraordinary decision by Israel to carry out strikes in Qatar's capital, Doha. More on that next, but you're listening to Tonight with Andrew Marr, and the time now, 6:19.
Weekdays from 7 a.m.
Why this staggering level of incompetence?
Straight to the point.
This is the economics of the madhouse from this government.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast on LBC.
But she does seem to struggle with her sums.
Listen on Global Player or the new LBC app. Download it now from your app store. LBC. Tonight with Andrew Marr. Watch live on both Global Player and the new LBC app.
6:21, an extraordinary further escalation in the Middle East war, with Israel bombing Hamas leaders in their faraway Qatar homes, an act Qatar has described as cowardly and a clear breach of international law, but which Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says was a targeted strike against Hamas's terrorist chieftains. It seems they were part of the negotiating team. Given that the US has a huge air base not very far away and yet seems to have given the green light for the attack, there are lots of questions to answer here. Lord Peter Ricketts, the former UK National Security Advisor, joins me now. Let's try and get some answers. Lord Ricketts, thank you very much for this. First of all, Qatar says this is a clear breach of international law. Are they right?
I'm not a lawyer, Andrew, and you're not, but I was taught in my Foreign Office career that states do have a right of self-defense, but it is very hedged about in international law with conditions about proportionality and imminence, and Israel would have to produce the evidence that they thought this group were presenting an imminent threat to the state of Israel. So it's arguable, no doubt, in international law. The diplomatic consequences, I think, are very clear.
It was targeted, clearly, and relatively narrowly so, and it was in response to the murder of Israeli citizens yesterday. So that's clear. But it also suggests, given this is the negotiating team, that Israel has given up on any chance of negotiating with Hamas. All of that is over.
I think it's a pretty good rule of thumb in diplomacy that if you attack and try to kill the other side's negotiating team, you are not interested in a negotiated solution. Yes. And I think it is now clear, it's been clear for some time, I think, that Netanyahu doesn't want to negotiate a ceasefire with Hamas. He is looking for total victory, whatever that means, total military control of Gaza. But I think it's a huge question, and perhaps Keir Starmer will put this to President Herzog of Israel tomorrow. What is the strategy now? Is it indeed to occupy, annex Gaza from here on in, to break the morale of the people of Gaza and drive them into expulsion, to going to other countries? Or is there still a route to a negotiated solution? I think tonight, I must say, it looks even more unlikely than it was before.
But indeed, Keir Starmer has condemned what's happened. What about the role of America, though? Because clearly they did know in advance. They've said that in the White House, and therefore they gave some kind of permission for this. And yet they themselves have an airbase not very far away. So what do you think the thinking in the Trump administration might be about this?
Well, I think in terms of the Americans, we don't know whether they were informed 5 minutes before the attack or consulted in any way. Of course, the Israelis had to inform them. If they'd flown their aircraft towards the big American airbase, they could well have been shot down by US air defenses. So informing them, deconflicting, as the military would say at the last moment, clearly that was essential. Whether that left the White House time to have stopped it, I don't know. But yes, I mean, the implication is that the White House at least acquiesced, accepted that Netanyahu was going to do this. We'll see how much backing Trump himself gives him, bearing in mind that Qatar has been a good ally of the US. And Trump, I think, has appreciated that. The Americans indeed have been in direct negotiations with the Hamas people there. So certainly it creates all sorts of issues for the Americans. But behind it all is, what does this mean about Israeli strategy? And I hope that the Americans will be interested in that as well.
Let's hope so. Lord Ricketts, thank you very much indeed for joining me. Now, to drive up efficiency, all of England's hospital trusts are going to be ranked publicly, with the chief executives of the worst performing ones having their pay cut by at least £15,000. This will, in theory, allow patients to shop around. In practice, however, I wonder. If, God forbid, I have another stroke, I am unlikely to spend time studying trust performances before scrambling for an ambulance. And if you are mugged on a Saturday night out and you come round in A&E, how much does it help you to discover that you're sitting in a poorly performing trust? Anyway, I'm sure they mean well. Let's talk now to the Health Minister in charge of secondary care, Karin Smyth. Karin, this business of patients shopping around, in the real world, we don't and often we can't.
I think that's a fair comment, and your analogy, and let's hope that doesn't happen for people undergoing that shock of a traumatic event and then rush to the nearest. You do want to know that those standards are at the highest that they can be. So it's not just about the shopping around Target. That is important for people who are looking at waiting lists, who might want to go somewhere else because of family reasons, family support. People don't exercise their choice as much as they perhaps know they can in terms of what we call elective care, planned incidents. But I think it is right, and we feel very strongly that given the size of the NHS budget, £200 billion, the place it has in the population's hearts, that inside the system, people do know this information. It is all available. You can go to NHS England and find it out. And we want to bring that transparency to local people on a number of issues. And I think staff also, they want to know where they're doing well, but they also where things are failing, whether that's because of leadership, whether that's because of the buildings, whether it's because of historic funding. They want that exposed as well.
More info. Minister, let me ask, in the real world, as this rolls out, will we all go, presumably it's online, so we click online. What information will we find out about our local trusts? Is it standard of clinical care, efficiency, cleanliness, what?
There's a whole series of 30-odd metrics that are brought together in a way that you can toggle into it, and people have been doing that today. And you can go sort of beneath the main headlines into all of those things. So it's trying to bring information that's already there to make it more accessible. So you might look at your urgent care, your emergency care, and I'd encourage people to do that. And we've had, we did a sort of hit list of 1,000 at one point during the day, been hundreds coming all day. We'll release that information tomorrow from NHS England. The data is accurate. The trusts have had a chance to check the data. That's also a good thing because data's not always accurate.
How confident are you that this is going to be fair to doctors and managers? Because obviously every hospital has a very different clientele. You know, the social conditions around the hospital may be different. The hospital itself may be a very old building or a brand new one. In other words, you can't simply look at a bunch of doctors and managers and say, you have failed. Well, you can, but you might be unfair.
Well, I think that's fair, and many commentators will make that point. Context is important in many incidences. Very rural populations, the population that I represent in South Bristol is very different, for example, to Lincolnshire or parts of Cornwall further down in the southwest. Cities are different. But isn't that a good thing to start talking about in terms of systems? We talk about £200 billion. We talk about the NHS is broken, but we're going to fix it. It is variable. Just naturally some variation in any kind of system that size. But is the variation acceptable? And it's not always the ones in the poorest area or the ones with the worst buildings who are doing the worst. And that's an important point, I think, to understand. So let's bring all that information out. Let's have that local discussion. It is a key part of accountability, and it's a key part of responsibility for those doctors and those managers leading those trusts. They actually welcome it. You're right. It has to be the right. It has to be the right metric. It's got to be the right incentives as well. So you talked about penalising pay, but we're also incentivising people to go and work, to uproot their lives, to go and live in areas away from their families, maybe travelling to support systems with long-standing problems. We can't let that continue. So it's iterative. We want to learn from it, but we think it's a key part of transparency.
I have you here as a government minister. I must ask you, you've seen the scenes and you've seen the reaction from the Israeli attacks in Qatar. What do you think?
I'm seeing it unfolding on screens as we speak, and it's unbelievable, isn't it? When I first heard coming into studios this evening that this has happened, escalation is not where we want to be, where anyone wants to be. And at the end of the day, I mean, you and I and many people listening and watching know at the end of the day, politics has to resolve this. People have to be round a table. So we will see more information coming out, I'm sure.
Did the British government have any clue about what was going to happen before it did happen?
My understanding is that we did not.
You did not. And presumably this is something that the Prime Minister will be raising with the Israelis.
I would think both the Foreign Office and the Ministry of Defence will be working with the Prime Minister very urgently on this situation.
Is there more Britain should be doing to put pressure on? You know, the sanctions that we've announced and the things we've done so far haven't really had any effect at all.
So I think the key thing is we have to work with our international partners on this. And I would say this, wouldn't I? But I think Keir Starmer, since coming into office, has been exemplary in doing that and raising our profile on the international stage, forging those relationships. I see headlines coming up on the screen as we talk from Emmanuel Macron and so on, and from the UN. I'm a strong believer in those institutions. We are as a party, so we have to work together. It is truly shocking. Escalation at this particular point is really, really shocking.
Terrible. All right. Karin Smyth, Minister for Secondary Care, or as I would put it, hospitals. Thank you very much indeed for coming in.
Thank you.
Now, the familial race for Rupert Murdoch's vast media empire is over, with his son Lachlan crowned as successor. But who is Lachlan Murdoch? We'll find out more in a few minutes. But first, time now 6:31, and here is Amelia Cox with the news headlines.
Israel has carried out a strike targeting Hamas leaders in the Qatari capital Doha, which it's understood the US approved. Qatar, which has mediated indirect negotiations between Israel and Hamas, calls the attack a blatant violation of international law. One woman has died trying to cross the English Channel in a small boat. The Coast Guard alerted police this afternoon with an emergency helicopter pictured flying above the port of Dover earlier. And the former Transport Secretary has refused to tell LBC whether she believes Sir Keir Starmer will still be the Prime Minister at the next election. Speaking on Tonight with Andrew Marr, Louise Haigh says he must deliver the change he promised to keep the support of backbenchers. LBC weather, heavy rain for the southwest and the far south tonight, patchier in Northern Ireland and the far west of Scotland, but dry elsewhere, lows of 7 degrees.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast on LBC.
There's a heck of a change in the field of health because the idea that effectively league tables will be introduced for the first time. Health Secretary Wes Streeting. Anyone who follows football knows league tables don't lie. They expose success, failure. Fans know exactly where their team stands. What's the equivalent then of a 3-point win, and what's the equivalent of getting 0 points for a loss?
Let's name and praise for a minute. Take Northumbria. They are non-specialist hospital. One of the things that puts them top of the table, they have integrated their A&E service with local community services.
Is there a VAR? If I'm running a hospital and I think I've been unfairly docked points or whatever, who do I go to?
The data doesn't lie, Nick.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast. Back tomorrow morning from 7. Listen on your radio, on Global Player and the LBC app. This is LBC. Message Andrew Marr on WhatsApp now on 0345 60 60 973.
6:34. Britain's ambassador in Washington is facing more questions about his relationship with the disgraced financier and sex trafficker Jeffrey Epstein, after a birthday book was revealed by US lawyers with multiple messages from Lord Peter Mandelson within it. Let's get the view from Washington with LBC's man there, Simon Marks. Simon, great to have you on the show. Now, we know that Jeffrey Epstein had lots and lots of friends. How embarrassing, how toe-curling is this kind of birthday friendship book which has been revealed?
Oh, well, the book itself is absolutely toe-curling, lewd, lecherous. It becomes absolutely apparent that an entire cadre of the upper echelons of New York City particularly was absolutely aware of Jeffrey Epstein's proclivities and indeed joking about them in various 50th birthday messages to Jeffrey Epstein that were compiled in that book that was gathered and put together by his then girlfriend girlfriend Ghislaine Maxwell. The most lurid, of course, that has hit the headlines, that from Donald Trump, and we can talk about that in a second. But you're absolutely right, Andrew. Attention is being drawn to messages from Peter Mandelson, who describes, now Lord Mandelson, now the British ambassador to Washington, who describes Jeffrey Epstein, this is back in 2003, as his best pal, and who says that Mr. Epstein is an intelligent, sharp-witted man who parachuted into his life. So there is embarrassment about that, given what later happened to Jeffrey Epstein. Now, Lord Mandelson says he has previously expressed the view that he had not encountered Jeffrey Epstein and had not forged any kind of friendship with him, and there is nothing new arising out of this birthday book for him to address. But it certainly puts fresh focus on not just the nature of Peter Mandelson's friendship with Jeffrey Epstein, but the friendship of the great and the powerful, particularly in New York and elsewhere, with the disgraced and deceased financier.
Absolutely, it does. Lord Mandelson's also said, and I'm sure this is these days true, that he deeply regrets ever having met Jeffrey Epstein. But as you were indicating there, it's kind of the tone, it's the intimacy of the flattering remarks that he's written in this book and the photographs that go along with them, which will embarrass him.
Yes, absolutely. And I think it's fair to say that when you hear phrases like, you know, he's an intelligent, sharp-witted man who parachuted into my life, I mean, there are cadences there that frankly sound pretty similar to some of the things that Lord Mandelson has been saying about President Trump since he arrived here as British ambassador, in the sense that Peter Mandelson is clearly pretty malleable in terms of the approaches that he takes, even to people like Donald Trump, with whom he has absolutely no philosophical or political shared viewpoint. I mean, clearly now, as Britain's top diplomat in Washington, D.C., he thinks that it is in the country's interests for him to flatter Donald Trump, as he has done on camera on numerous occasions at the White House. When you look at these comments about Jeffrey Epstein, they also perhaps provide a window into the way in which, over many decades, Lord Mandelson has navigated his way through some of these pretty complicated social settings.
He is a remarkably kind of sinuous operator, Peter Mandelson, and gets into all sorts of places, including the Oval Office, where he wasn't expected. And we saw Donald Trump almost purring about his wonderful accent. But there is a dark rumour over here that Trump's real nickname for him these days is Sneaky Pete. Have you picked that up at all?
I had not picked up that, Andrew. I'm glad you told me that. I had not heard that on the rumour mill. But look, I mean, as someone who was very heavily involved in European trade, Lord Mandelson was not perhaps in many ways the obvious pick to be Keir Starmer's ambassador to the United States. When we've seen him in the Oval Office, as we did, for example, when there was that phone call with Keir Starmer announcing the trade agreement, the partial trade agreement between the United States and the UK, as so many other visitors have chosen to do in the Oval Office since January, he was absolutely slathering Donald Trump in praise and baby oil. I mean, there's no question about that. And that is the way that many people that enter that Oval Office think it is in their best interests to behave. But clearly, if that nickname is indeed accurate, it suggests that Donald Trump might just be seeing through some of that.
There's a wariness there. Meanwhile, this Epstein story is simply not going away. You mentioned the drawing, the notorious drawing, which, for people who don't know about it, is a kind of rather simplistic drawing of a naked woman with lots of kind of flattering comments about Epstein written all over it, and then Trump's famous signature in a very delicate place. Now, Trump says he doesn't draw pictures. This is all fake news. And indeed, he's got a big legal case against Rupert Murdoch, I think, on this very subject.
Yeah, against the Wall Street Journal, Rupert Murdoch, and its UK-born editor, Emma Tucker, all of them targeted for defamation lawsuits, because the Wall Street Journal, of course, first reported the existence of this drawing back in July. Now the drawing has been released after the Epstein estate was subpoenaed by the House of Representatives Oversight Committee. Documents furnished to that committee yesterday in the case of the Trump drawing immediately released to the media. When Donald Trump says, "I don't draw," and his son Eric last night told Newsmax TV, "I can absolutely assure you that my father has never doodled or drawn cartoons," it's simply not true. Donald Trump, in his own book back in 2008, talks about the number of times that he has put drawings together that he has contributed to charities so they can sell them. One of his drawings back in 2017 sold at auction for more than $29,000. He may not be Michelangelo, but he absolutely has a capacity to draw. And this argument that Republicans are advancing, the White House saying he didn't draw it, it's not his signature. I mean, there is copious evidence to suggest that this signature is very similar to a signature that he has signed when he's made personal contributions to other recipients. So they're in a jam over it. There's no question about it. We're about to see the White House briefing, and I suspect they will deny, and distract.
Well, I guess the moral is be very, very careful who you make your friends. Can I ask you about one much more serious issue, really, which is the Doha strike, the strike by the Israelis on Qatar, Hamas people in Qatar. Now, we know that there was some kind of communication between Netanyahu and the White House before this happened, but have we any indication as to whether the Israeli government was just simply informing the Americans or was asking permission?
Look, I think we'll hear a lot more in the upcoming White House briefing, but the word from the White House is that the United States was notified ahead of time by the Israeli government about the strike, which, of course, the Americans will argue is not the same as the United States approving or giving the green light for this strike. But it's causing serious difficulty for the Trump administration in terms of its relationship with the Qataris, a relationship that Donald Trump has up until now really very carefully guarded ever since the signing of the Abraham Accords during his first term in government. The Qataris and a host of other governments across the Middle East region absolutely outraged by this Israeli strike on Doha, and I think it's going to leave Donald Trump with some serious long-lasting repercussions as well as immediate questions to answer.
Well, Simon, I know you have a news conference to hotfoot it to, but thank you very much indeed for that. Now then, if you have ever been interested in Rupert Murdoch and his influence on politics and public life, you're going to have to learn a new name, Lachlan Murdoch, the son who will now inherit the empire. Succession is over. I think this means the empire stays together. The Times and The Sun in the UK remain under Murdoch ownership, and the conservative bias of the media in Britain and America is, if anything, enhanced. I say I think because I don't know, but perhaps my next guest does. Katie Robertson is the media industry reporter for the New York Times, and she wrote the piece Lachlan Murdoch, the media prince who would be king. Katie, thank you very much indeed for joining me. Can I ask, first of all, you to paint a little bit of a picture of Lachlan Murdoch? He is pretty clearly the most conservative of the adult children.
Hi, thank you so much for having me on. Yes, he is undoubtedly the most conservative, and we've been able to see this through court documents from the fight they've had over the family trust, as well as, emails and depositions and text messages from a case some of your listeners might remember, which was a defamation case brought by Dominion Voting Systems against Fox News over the 2020 presidential election. So we can see from, his own writing that he definitely is proud of what Fox News is doing, and he wants to stick to that political bent.
And the essence of this court case is that, or the settlement, I should say, is that Lachlan gets Fox News, he gets the News UK, the News International brands, he gets everything in terms of power, and his three siblings are bought out and will all be billionaires as a result.
Yes, I mean, they already were billionaires, but they're adding more to the fortune now and really getting what they wanted. They've wanted him to buy them out for some time, and he wasn't willing to pay, enough to keep them happy. But now with this deal that they've come to, Lachlan remains in power, will stay in power. The new trust that they're going to establish goes till 2050. So it is going to be decades more of really the Murdoch media empire as we know it under Rupert's son.
So Lachlan now becomes, in effect, one of the most powerful people in the world, certainly in the world media. London-born and educated in the States, but he now bases himself in Australia, where his father came from, of course. What more can you say about him?
Sure. He proudly identifies as Australian, and as you said, he wasn't born there, and he did all his schooling in the US. He went to Princeton. But he has just identified so strongly with Australia over the years. He went there in his early 20s to work in News Corp's Australian newspapers and kind of get a sense of the family business. And there's something about the lifestyle, about the Australian spirit that he just has really identified with. So he moved his whole family there during the pandemic, and now does that commute, which anyone who's ever flown anywhere from Australia knows is not a short commute from Australia, from Sydney to LA, frequently to New York. Often we're told he works, he has to work overnight. He has to get calls at midnight because of the extreme time difference between News Corp and Fox headquarters and Sydney, Australia.
And I don't know whether it's possible to talk about what he might do with the empire now, but he inherits a relatively traditional media empire, the television or the newspapers, but he himself has been fascinated by new media, the online world.
He has. And we're seeing a little of that in his leadership with Fox recently. They bought a big podcasting company this year that has, funnily enough, some former Fox stars as part of it, such as Megyn Kelly. So they're getting into the podcasting space, and they've also just introduced a streaming app for Fox. So they're getting into the streaming game as well. So he does have an interest in expanding on that and the new forms of media, as you said. But it'll be interesting to see what he does with the print products, and which are obviously a much weaker part of the businesses.
Absolutely. Kate, final question, really. The old man, Rupert Murdoch himself, 94 now, I think. Do you believe that he will carry on as the effective, because he's still very involved in all the businesses, he hasn't lost his mental sharpness? Is he going to carry on right to the end, do you think, or does he stand back at this point and say, Lachlan, my son, it's over to you?
Well, he has a title of Chairman Emeritus at this point, so he technically has stepped back, but I think we can see clearly how closely the two are, that he wanted Lachlan all along to be his successor and has made him in his own image, and I am sure is frequently in touch with him about all kinds of things. But look, this is his company, this is his business that he's done for some 7 decades, so I do not think he's stepping back till the end.
I can sort of see Brian Cox snarling at both of us, Kate. Thank you very much indeed for that. Now then, Boris Johnson is no stranger to scandal, and he's facing down a new one after a Guardian investigation. I'm going to be talking to one of the journalists who uncovered this, but the time now 6:48.
Coming up at 7 on LBC, Ian Dale.
As Israel bombs Hamas leaders in Qatar, the British government says Israel is not committing genocide in Gaza. Are they right?
Ian Dale on LBC. Tonight with Andrew Marr. Listen on your smart speaker. Just say, play LBC.
6:50. Now, I did mention Boris Johnson a little earlier. If you're feeling nostalgic, keep listening. New revelations published by The Guardian today reveal some big questions about how he has used public funds set aside to help former prime ministers. Let's talk now to one of The Guardian journalists who's been investigating the story, Tom Burgess. Tom, welcome. First of all, this comes from a big sort of data leak or a data breach from Boris Johnson's office, yes?
Yes, Andrew, nice to be with you. Yes, exactly that. There's been a leak of data from Boris Johnson's private office, from which he runs his life now that he's no longer Prime Minister. Hundreds of documents that expose what he's been doing since he left office.
And what he's been doing, apart from anything else, is making a great deal of money. And that wouldn't really be anything to do with the rest of us, except that there is part of the British system which gives ex-prime ministers help and financial assistance to be an ex-prime minister. So again, just explain to people listening what that's all about.
Yeah, former prime ministers get about £100,000 a year in taxpayer money, in our money, to support their private office. But the stipulation is that money can only be used for ongoing public duties. So the duties that an ex-prime minister might have in public life, ongoing public life. What these documents call into question is whether Boris Johnson has stuck to those rules, because the private office that receives those taxpayer funds has clearly been engaged in money-making operations for him all over the world.
Well, that's a really interesting question. But another story, I guess, part of this is his relationship with Peter Thiel, who's the man behind Palantir. Palantir is the great big data company, which obviously now runs an awful lot of the data for the NHS. And before any of this happened, I think during lockdown, Boris Johnson had a very private meeting, it wasn't revealed at the time, with the guy that runs and owns Palantir.
Yes, I mean, we still don't know as much as we should about that meeting. But yes, it appears that Peter Thiel, incredibly powerful guy, huge figure in the American defence industry, his company Palantir enjoys lots of UK government contracts with the NHS and so on. Yes, appears to have had this undeclared meeting with Boris. This is one of the striking things about these documents, the gaps that we can see between what was declared and what was happening in Downing Street.
And of course, Palantir went on to get a very, very important contract after all of this. And it was represented, at least for a while in the UK, by a company called Global Counsel, which is under the aegis of Peter Mandelson. We've just been talking about him. So it all connects.
Yeah, well, I mean, Mandelson, we've written recently about Mandelson too, obviously now the ambassador in the US, and about the various questions that he's faced about conflicts of interest. I mean, isn't this the broader point here, that with these figures who wield incredible amounts of public trust, that there needs to be this scrutiny of whether, once they're no longer in public office, they're using the contacts and the influence they amassed as stewards of the public good, as people in public service, whether they're monetising that for themselves. There are rules about this, and the question is whether...
I should be absolutely clear. There's no reason for anybody not to represent Palantir. It's a perfectly, respectable company. The question really here is what Boris Johnson was doing with public money. Has he given you any response at all to this story?
Well, as you can imagine, we've been putting everything to him before we published. Initially, there was silence. We did hear something back today. Just a few words from the great orator. He says this is all rubbish, and he says that the public money that. There has been no abuse of the public money to which his private office is entitled, and he likens our Guardian journalism to Soviet propaganda.
Soviet propaganda. Well, Mr. Menshevik, there you are. Thank you very much indeed for your help, Tom Burgess. Now then, the mysterious fly-by-night, paint when nobody's watching street artist Banksy might just have gone one wall too far. He's produced a characteristically witty and political mural on the walls of the Royal Courts of Justice, just across Parliament Square from the Commons. It shows a judge beating up a protester with his gavel. they covered it up very quickly. But this is no ordinary wall. It's covered by CCTV, and Banksy, who's protected his identity since the 1990s, may now face a charge of criminal damage. And that means his identity would be revealed in court. Let's talk now to John Brandler, the art collector and art gallery owner. John, there's been lots of rumours about Banksy's real identity. He comes from Bristol and all the rest of it. But is this the moment, if he is charged and appears in court, when it all becomes entirely public?
Does he have to appear in court? Can't he just plead guilty?
I think if he pleads guilty, there will still be court documents where he has to give his real name and address and all of that.
Well, things like that are known to a lot of people already. I mean, he has accountants, he pays tax, he has a publicity machine, he has a company called Pest Control. So, you know, I've seen in various newspapers over the years photographs that purport to be him. His original name was Robin Gunningham. You know, we know a lot about him already. It's the marketing that's been so phenomenal. But I agree with you. I think he's gone one wall too many. I think that this is a listed building, a historic building. It's the item itself is obviously about his views on Palestine and who he supports and who he doesn't support in Palestine. That's a separate political thing. But at some point, people have to become accountable. Now, I own 5 Banksy walls that he has gone and painted on. When he painted them, it is technically criminal damage. Then the owners have decided to sell them. But the actual act, you know, if you kill somebody, if the family says that's all right, we didn't like them anyway, it's still murder.
Indeed. So he's been conducting criminal damage all over the place. He might have gone on a particular wall for it. Is there some kind of political point being made here, do you think, about Palestine action and criminal damage?
Yeah, well, certainly the point he's making is about Palestine action, and he thinks that, you know, the Parliament is wrong, the government is wrong. In his opinion, he knows better.
Mm-hmm. Tell me a little bit, I mean, you've got a gallery, about the market for Banksy, because we see all sorts of stories about Banksys being sort of cut out of public places and then taken off to be sold. What's a real Banksy, what's not a Banksy? I mean, it's almost like kind of Andy Warhol merchandise. You see Banksy merchandise all over the place. He was supposed to be a kind of radical street artist, a voice of protest from the streets, and he has become a very, very well monetized and presumably very affluent, in a sense, mainstream artist.
Yes, he has. And what surprises me is that he won't authenticate his street art, although he is known as a street artist. He will only authenticate the canvases and the prints that he makes a lot of money on. I think that's a conflict of interest. But he is a very, very wealthy man. But don't forget, what he has done for British art is the same as the Beatles did for British music. He's become the yardstick. You know, the Beatles weren't the only pop group of the time. They weren't the only boy band of the time. They weren't the only famous musicians. But Banksy has become the yardstick for every potential artist in the future. And he has inspired thousands of young people to take an interest in art. You don't see young people queuing up round the block to go into the National Gallery.
Well, you should. You absolutely should. You should. You're talking to one of its trustees, and we're about to expand enormously, and it's a wonderful place. But I take your point very much. John, thank you so much for talking to me. Now then, if you've missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on both Global Player and the LBC app, where you can stay up to date with all the latest news and opinion. You can put your news categories in the order you'd like them. You can pause, you can rewind live radio, and you can listen to a range of podcasts. So download the official LBC app for free from your app store right now. Coming up at 10 on LBC, Ben Kentish. But now it's time for Ian Dale.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Israeli forces carried out an unprecedented bombing raid on Hamas leaders in Qatar this morning, killing at least one of them. There has been widespread international condemnation of the Israeli action, not least from Keir Starmer. In another development, it's emerged the British government does not consider what Israel is doing in Gaza as a genocide. Do you agree? At 8, on Cross Question, Labour MP Rosie Writing, Conservative MP Sir Ashley Fox, Reform UK MP Sarah Pochin, and the Mail on Sunday's Dan Hodges. At 9, we'll turn our attention to the race for the deputy leadership of the Labour Party. What will it mean if Keir Starmer's favourite candidate, Bridget Phillipson, doesn't win? Will it signal the end of Starmerism, and could his premiership be in trouble after only 14 months?
On your radio, on the LBC app, and
Play LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation.